look at what is grabbing the headlines around the world as ever at this time. Lots of focus on the results of Austria's presidential election. We've been telling you about a nail-biting race. I mean, in the end, it was 31,000 votes between the independent and the far right. I mean, it's really squeak, isn't it?
Really squeaking past there. Let's take a look at Deep Press. That's an Austrian paper. It has the exact figure. It's actually 31,026 votes. Unfortunately, this is not the right front page, but we'll get to another one. Let's take a look at Der Standard. You can also see it's another Austrian paper. They also have that figure, 31,026 votes that decided the election. So that's the front page of another Austrian paper. That in its editorial, you can see it there. In its editorial, Der Standard says that Austria has really changed after this election. It's the first time, of course, that a member of the Green Party has been elected president. Interesting analysis piece, though, that says that even if a lot of voters chose Van den Bellen for tactical reasons, not out of political conviction, this result really marks a victory against the right wing and its momentum in Austria. This is a victory for cosmopolitanism and holding the pro-European course that Austria is on.
Of course, Hofer would have become the first far-right head of a European state had he won. What are papers outside of Austria saying about that?
Well, there's a huge sigh of relief in many papers. It must be said the Daily Beast here talks about a very near miss. You can see their take on things. They say that Austria's pistol-packing, immigrant-bashing Donald Trump loses. So those are pretty harsh words there for Hofer. But he lost by just 0.6% of the vote. Even in defeat, the right wing in Europe is rising. Similar fears in other papers as well. Let's take a look at the editorial in The Guardian. You can see it said it was a frightening glimpse over the precipice, but it's far from over. This was a test for Austria, of course, but also a test for the EU's tired political systems in general, according to The Guardian. Now, Le Figaro agrees today in an analysis piece. You can see they're talking about how Austria is a laboratory for what comes next in Europe, because across Europe, voters are impatient for solutions to problems like unemployment and also the refugee crisis. And they're so impatient that they're increasingly drawn to parties that offer simple but dangerous remedies.
Move on to another story now, getting a lot of attention. This is the US President Barack Obama's visit to Vietnam. Now, kicked off on Sunday. He's still there as well, isn't he?
That's right. Le Courrier du Vietnam focuses on the meeting yesterday that took place between Barack Obama and his counterpart, Tran Dai Quan. Now, what's incredible about this visit is Obama announced that the U.S. is fully lifting a 41-year-old embargo on the sale of lethal weapons to Vietnam, of course, once upon a time an enemy of the United States. Very interesting piece today in the New York Times, actually. You'll notice it's signed by John Kerry, John McCain, and Bob Kerry. Now, these men fought in the Vietnam War, and they're reflecting on moving on in Vietnam, but remembering the lessons from that war. Now, among these lessons, we must never again confuse a war with the warriors. And then the final, perhaps most important lesson, with sufficient effort and will, seemingly unbridgeable differences can be reconciled. And according to this article, what's happening now in Vietnam is proof that old enemies can become new partners.
Because under Obama's presidency, the US has been trying to really bolster, hasn't it, its relationships with its Pacific allies, as China, of course, is also asserting its territorial claims.
That's right. Now, Obama says that what's happening in Vietnam has nothing to do with China, but a lot of other papers beg to differ. Let's start with the Wall Street Journal. In their editorial, they're focusing on this what they're calling a Vietnam pivot, which is actually part of a broader Asian pivot that we've been seeing under Obama's presidency. And for once, the Wall Street Journal actually applauds Obama for his policy. It points out that Vietnam is one of several countries in the region that are involved in maritime disputes with China. This decision sends an unmistakable signal to Beijing that their efforts to bully their neighbors is backfiring.
Chinese press, though, they're not so thrilled, are they?
That's right. I pulled out two editorials. Let's start with the Global Times, which says that saying this isn't about China is a complete lie. This trip really bolsters the U.S.'s China containment policy. This is part of three nets that the U.S. is knitting around China, according to Global Times. Those three nets are ideology, security, and then an economy and a trade net, if you will. And let's take a look at a final editorial. This is in the China Daily here. It's talking about how this really actually doesn't announce very good things to come in the region in terms of peace and stability. You can see former foes must not spark a regional tinderbox here.
And finally, a new study, this is in the UK, it's about religion in England and Wales.
That's right. Very interesting study that's getting a lot of attention in the British press. Let's take a look at the front page of The Guardian. You can see it sums up the results here. Christians are now a minority as the UK becomes less and less religious. Now, according to the study, 48.5% of people identify themselves as nuns, essentially. Not nuns as in a nun, but nun as in not having a religion. And that's almost double what that figure was just back in 2011 during the national consensus. And those who define themselves as Christians, so Anglicans, Catholics, etc., they make up 43.8%. So you can see here the Independent as well talking about how people with no religion exceeds Christians. Now, this is only in England and in Wales, but these results certainly have caused a lot of alarm within Christian leaders, amongst Christian leaders who are concerned about this trend.
Perhaps not surprisingly from their point of view. All right, thanks very much, Flo. Flo with the papers and Stephen with business on France 24. That's the news for now. More coming up in just a few seconds' time. And we're going to be reporting as well on how a Catholic community supported by the Pope, carrying on our religious theme, but it's helping bring Syrian and Iraqi families from Lebanon to Italy. We follow their roots, an emotional report, fascinating stuff as well in today's Focus in about 15 minutes.